Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of season two for Music Works. And I'm so happy to see you, Katie Beardsworth, the author and the host of those wonderful episodes with great musicians and music managers and other supporters of the music industry. Welcome. Good morning.
Thank you. Good afternoon here.
I know the light
Always.
looks different.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to present season two of Music Works.
Yeah, and we're starting the season two with this really, really important episode for all musicians and especially for all composers and for performers. Can you please just walk us through a short introduction of the episode?
Absolutely. So, in this episode, I talked to Harriet Wybor from PRS for Music about royalties. And so, it's a particularly useful episode if you're a composer and you want to know why you should claim royalties, how you can claim them. It really is a detailed how-to guide. And Harriet is an absolute expert, and her job is to support composers with this process through PRS for Music. Um, a particular highlight of this episode for me is where she says that we need to recognise the true value of music and the work that goes into its creation and performance, whether that's to a live audience or online. So, as we transition to the episode, if I can just say, anyone who has experience of this, please do shout in the comments and let us know if this helps you and if there's more support we can help you with. Enjoy! Hello, and welcome to season two of Music Works, the podcast that explores the classical music industry. We had a tremendous first season, so if you enjoy this episode, do please check out the amazing range of topics we covered with over 20 fantastic guests. In this episode, the first of the new season, we're off to a great start with Harriet Wybor of PRS for Music. We know the ins and outs of performing rights can seem a bit of a mystery, so if music royalties matter to you or if you're simply curious, this episode is for you. Have you ever wondered exactly what the difference is between publishing rights and mechanical rights? Have you been daunted by the process involved in signing up to claim royalties? If so, then this episode is for you. Stay tuned to the end where Harriet will be sharing some great resources for you to take away. So let's go to the Music Works studio to explore with Harriet the works of PRS for Music and explain just how music royalties work. Hi Harriet, it's great to have you with us today.
Hi, how are you?
Well, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
No problem at all. This is our first episode back after the Christmas break and the first episode of season two of the podcast, Music Works. And I'm really excited to have Harriet with us today. Harriet works for PRS for Music, the Performing Rights Society, and is here to share with us some insights into supporting composers, which is very important to us. So, is there anything else you'd like to say about your job and your role at PRS?
Absolutely. Well, hopefully, during this conversation, I'll try to break down some of those aspects of what we do. Just as an overview, I manage PRS for Music's relationships with composers and publishers, working predominantly in classical music. That can involve anything from providing business support and resolving queries, to working with colleagues in licensing or operations, or working with external organisations and education providers to raise awareness about PRS for music. I previously worked in music publishing after studying composition and intellectual property law, so I've always had a really strong interest in new music and copyright, even if that seems quite like a bit of an odd combination.
That sounds like quite an ideal combination when you consider the challenges facing composers of new music. So why is copyright important for composers?
Well, copyright is an intellectual property right that protects original creative works. So once a piece of music is created, it recognises the composer as the copyright owner and it gives them control over their music. Copyright in a musical composition lasts for the lifetime of the creator plus 70 years after their death. And there's a separate copyright in a sound recording, which lasts for 70 years from when it was created. Copyright allows creators to control when their music is used by other people, and it also defines who owns a piece of music when a collaborator, a composer, is collaborating with somebody else, such as another composer or an author. And I think most importantly, copyright enables composers to receive royalties by granting permission or licensing other people to use their music, and that's where we come in at PRS for Music.
Great, that's very clear. And so what is PRS for Music?
We represent the rights of over 150,000 composers, songwriters, and music publishers in the UK and around the world. So, as a membership organisation, we work to ensure that creators are paid when their music is streamed, downloaded, broadcast, performed, and played in public. So PRS Music is actually the home of two royalty collection societies. There's the Performing Rights Society, or PRS, and the Mechanical Copyright Protection Society, or MCPS. PRS represents the performing right and MCPS represents the mechanical rights.
And what is the difference between performing rights and mechanical rights?
Well, performing rights apply when music is performed or played in public, in concerts, shops, online, via radio and TV broadcasts, whereas mechanical rights refer to the reproduction of music when music is copied into CDs, DVDs, online, and via radio and TV broadcasts. And I'm sure you noticed that I said online, radio, and TV broadcasting come twice, and that's because these uses involve a combination of both performing and mechanical rights. So most composers join PRS initially and then join MCPS at a later date if they find their music is being used on radio or TV. But it's not always necessary for composers to join MCPS, because if a composer has an agreement with a music publisher, the publisher can collect mechanical royalties on behalf of the composer.
Yes, that's right. And okay, and what can you explain what royalties actually are then, and where they come from?
Sure. So royalties are payments that are made to composers or creators when their music is used in public. So when a composer creates a piece of music, it's protected by copyright, and this gives them control over their work and the right to earn royalties when their music is used by somebody else. So when composers join PRS or MCPS, they assign some of those rights to us, which enables us to license uses of their music and collect and distribute the resulting royalties. So in 2019, over 18 trillion uses of music were reported to PRS for Music, which gives you an idea of the scale of the data that we receive. And we collected over £800 million. Yeah, absolutely. We collected £800 million on behalf of our members.
Fantastic. There's a problem with uncollected royalties often, is that right?
Well, we work really closely with music users and organisations that use music. So when we license different types of music usage, whether that's public performance or broadcast or online recorded media, we license the company or the organisation that's using music. So that might be venues, businesses, broadcasters, music services, and record labels. And then we collect data which helps us to identify which of our members' music has been used. So we distribute royalties by matching this data to musical works that have been registered on our database. So we work really closely with all of our licensees to provide this information. In some cases it's automated, in some cases it's more manual. And in those more manual cases, particularly around public performance, we've also developed ways that our members can tell us about this information as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later.
Oh, that sounds great. Very thorough. It's just I mean, I'm just kind of bowled over by the extent of the number of instances that you mentioned, and just trying to imagine how you possibly cope with it, trying to match up all that data. And are there any types of royalties that PRS for Music doesn't collect?
Yeah, we don't collect royalties from private performances or music that's used in acts of worship, such as church services. There are also three areas that we don't control the rights for, and the first of these is printed music or the hiring of orchestral scores and parts. The second area is grand rights, which apply to the live performance of dramatico-musical works such as opera, ballet, contemporary dance, and musicals or music theatre. All kinds of works where music forms an integral part of the storyline or the plot. And then finally, the third area that we don't control in the majority of cases is synchronization rights, which apply when music is used with moving images, such as advertising or films and games. And although we don't control these rights at PRS, composers still have the right to receive royalties for these types of uses, which they can license directly themselves or via a publisher or agent. So, you know, if a composer has an agreement with a music publisher, they would usually license uses and collect royalties on behalf of the composer, depending on the kind of agreement that they have.
Oh, that's really interesting to know that those distinctions. Thank you. So when should composers join PRS?
Well, we recommend that composers join once their music is being performed, broadcast, or made available online. And if that's happening and they don't have a publisher collecting royalties on their behalf, particularly for recorded media or broadcast, we also recommend joining MCPS in addition to PRS. As I said earlier, it's usually PRS that comes first for composers, and then they can make a decision about MCPS if that's relevant at a later date. There is a one-off joining fee of £100 each for PRS and MCPS. That's for lifetime membership, but we only advise composers to join if they're going to earn back the joining fee in royalties. Of course, the amount of royalties that you're going to receive as a composer depends on how and where your music is being used. But I'm always really happy to talk to composers in advance of joining about how their music is being used and what they can expect if they join. We also, wherever possible, we publish information about licensing tariffs and rates on our website. So you can get an idea of the kind of value for certain areas. And we also publish our commission fees there. And we only take commission on the royalties that we collect to cover our administration costs.
Yeah, that makes sense. And tell us about the other benefits to joining. Because I have a lot of experience of working with composers, and I was kind of chomping at the bit then to be like, oh, but here are all the reasons why you should join. But you tell us about why people should join.
Sure. I mean, in addition to the royalty collection, obviously, which is, you know, what we exist for, we have a range of resources, including webinars and video guides for new members. So that covers all of the questions that members might have when they first join, as well as a member services team who can help with royalty queries. And we have representatives based in Scotland and Northern Ireland, Wales, regionally across England, and genre-specific representatives like myself covering classical, dance and electronic music, media and South Asian music. So, you know, it's important to know as well that we have, wherever you're based or the area that you're working in, we have people nearby who understand the sort of the music scene where you are, the kind of sector that you're working in as well, and also really care about the music that you're writing. And, you know, we're really passionate about that. For classical members in particular, we've developed a range of composer workshops and showcases or commissioning partnerships over the past few years with organisations and ensembles like Cheltenham Music Festival, Wild Plum Arts, TCARE, the Berkeley Ensemble, the Hermes Experiment, and during the pandemic, we've adapted our plans with the Riot Ensemble to work remotely with 6 composers, writing and recording new works during lockdown, which were released online in collaboration with Zeitgeist and broadcast on BBC Radio 3.
Fantastic. Yeah, so a lot more to it than the collecting and distribution of royalties. So how can composers really make the most of their membership then?
I think once you join PRS or MCPS, the first thing to do is create an online account via our website, which is prsformusic.com. This is where you can update your contact details, bank details, view your statements, register works, and report live performances of your music. You receive a membership number, which is known as a CAE number or IPI number. And this is what you use when registering works, so we can identify you and pay royalties to you. The next thing is registering your works on our database. We recommend doing this as soon as possible after you join and after you create each new work going forwards. It's more difficult for us to pay royalties if you don't register your works, and we often get queries about this that relates to work registration. So it's a really key part of the process. As I mentioned earlier, we've also developed ways that members can report live performances of their music via our website by telling us about the date, venue, and the programme for the concert. Of course, that's not happening at the moment, but this ensures that we have information about when your music was performed. And if you're a member of PRS and you haven't done this before, you can report performances retrospectively up to 12 months for small venues, 3 years for concert venues in the UK, and 2 years overseas, provided that you were a member at the time that the performance took place. I think it probably sounds obvious, but it's really important to keep your contact details and bank details up to date, as it often gets overlooked, I think, when people move house or change their details, and then we can't pay our members or keep them informed about your royalties. It's worth familiarising yourself with our payment schedules, which are available on our website. That give you an idea of how long it takes for different types of royalties to be collected and distributed. So I'd recommend that if you haven't received royalties after 6 months of a radio broadcast or 12 months for a UK live performance, to get in touch with me so I can look into it further.
That's really helpful and really clear. There sounds like an awful lot to it, isn't there? Is it really complicated for composers, all this? Do you think?
I think it can seem a bit daunting if it's not an area that you're familiar with, but we put as much information on our website or in our webinars and video guides as possible. And I think the most important thing to remember is that we're here to help if you get stuck. In my experience, this kind of administration often gets put off or becomes a bit of a task that composers don't have time for. But I think it can actually be really empowering to take control of this kind of thing, and it doesn't take as long as you might think. One useful tip might be to make registering your works part of the composition process when you finish a piece, or set aside a regular time for admin. For some people, that's once a week, it might be once a month, or maybe even once every 3 months. But it just keeps you up to date with those kind of things, and it stops it allowing to build up. We're also here if you have any queries. I'm always happy to help composers who get in touch, and I think composers sometimes feel a bit guilty about asking or feel that they should already know the answer to their question. But there's no such thing as a silly question. I try and make contact with as many composers as possible and get to know their work. I'm also really easy to find on social media, so Twitter and LinkedIn are what I use for work, and I'm really happy for composers to get in touch with me that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think knowing that there's someone there who understands all this is enormously helpful. And I can certainly say from my perspective that for any composers out there who think that all other composers understand how all this works, they definitely don't. And I don't mean that in a, it is, that's why PRS and companies like that are there, is to support people with this, because it is complicated and it is an integral part of writing music, but it isn't a creative part of writing music. So therefore, it's much like, I don't know, a tax return or anything like that. It's sort of necessary
absolutely.
and essential.
And
I was going to go on.
Sorry, I think a bit like a tax return, it's one of those things that some people find more challenging than others. People's brains work in different ways, creatively, administratively, but it is one of those things that you have to do as part of the process of being a composer, and I think part of the business of being a composer. I think facing up to that, and hopefully reaching out for help when you need it is a really key aspect of that, and we're happy to do that.
Definitely. I think I liked what you said about it being empowering as well, because I feel that often when I talk to musicians, there's a sort of sense, so, and as you say, people are different. I'm quite admin focused, which is probably why I'm a manager. But I kind of take quite a lot of satisfaction out of doing my tax return early, as sad as that sounds. Whereas a lot of people aren't like that at all, and the kind of mindset that it's just this thing that people aren't good at, and they, potentially leave till the last minute and put off, or whatever. And I think that can actually be a real ongoing stress when
Yeah.
you're self-employed and you don't have necessarily much of a kind of professional network in terms of people that you see every day, and you're like, oh, I'm doing this today and so on. And I feel that that's one of the reasons why I like doing these things and getting them out of the way, is so that they're not this constant nagging, oh god, tax return time's coming around again, or whatever. And I personally find it quite empowering to be on top of things like that, and I feel that musicians could benefit from taking ownership over those things, and it's a part of running their music business, which is their own self and their own work, isn't it?
Definitely, and I think I am much better at this kind of thing than I am at composing. So I'm always really happy to help with that side of things. And I have helped composers in the past who say things like, "Oh, it's really taken a weight off my shoulders getting something sorted out." And it becomes this thing that you don't really know how to approach. It might be quite a small issue, but you don't really know that until you get into it. But most of the time, a quick conversation, I can find out what's going on, if there's an issue or a delayed royalty payment or something, and we can get that sorted out. So I definitely encourage anybody to reach out in that kind of situation, and we'll do our best to help.
That sounds like you're the ideal person to help anyone who's struggling with getting on top of that side of things.
There's never any
Um,
judgment, that's for certain.
yeah, I mean, likewise. Yeah, I sort of sometimes I talk to people and they say, "Oh, I've got this kind of ongoing contractual thing that has been nagging at me for ages," and we just want to sort these things, don't we? We don't need to worry about what's happened in the past. We just want to get it working and get it a weight off the shoulders, as you said.
Yeah.
I wondered if it would I want to talk about the challenges facing composers during COVID-19, but alongside that, as you've been speaking, I've been wondering, particularly given this perception that I think people definitely hold that everyone knows how to do this except them, whether you might share some of the sort of frequently asked questions that composers come to you with, and maybe some from the last year and some from less restricted times.
Sure. I mean, obviously, the pandemic has affected everyone in their personal and professional lives in different ways. So, in a way, I don't like to generalize. But of course, a major challenge throughout the music industry has, of course, been the impact of live music. And I think for contemporary classical music, in some situations, live performance might be the only setting in which new music is heard. So the ongoing uncertainty has had a significant impact on commissions as well. And I think it can be particularly difficult for composers in the early stages of their careers, when opportunities might be limited or time sensitive. We are quite fortunate that, of course, that some distance live performances were taking place prior to the current lockdown. And it's been really wonderful to see individuals and organisations continuing to commission and perform new music in online concerts. But this isn't possible for everyone. And I think continued financial support from the government will be crucial. But I think we also have to consider how to make these methods of engaging with music online more sustainable. So many online concerts have been available free of charge, and while it's definitely important that music should be accessible, we need to balance that with recognizing the true value of music and the work that goes into its creation and performance, whether that's to a live audience or online. I mean, one of the frequent questions that we get, of course, is about online royalties. And while royalties generated from online platforms and streaming services are growing, these benefits aren't necessarily being realised across all genres of music. So, as musicians like Tasman Little, Fenella Humphreys, Stuart McRae, and Matthew Whiteside have highlighted, the classical community generally sees very low returns from online streaming services. So I think finding a model where the classical community continues to innovate and benefit from the growth in this area is going to be really important.
I couldn't agree more. Obviously, it's something that we've talked about a lot over the past. Well, anyone, I mean, us on this podcast, but also everyone has talked about a lot. Is the balance between the accessibility of music and the need for it to be recognised financially and for it to be paid for, essentially. So what else do people ask then? Let's say someone's coming to you to decide whether to sign up. What kind of questions do you regularly hear?
So I think, the first thing that people often ask if they're thinking about joining PRS or MCPS is it going to be worth it? Is it going to be worth it for me to spend £100 on the joining fee in terms of the royalties that I'm going to receive? So I would normally have a conversation with them about what kind of performances or broadcasts they're getting of their music so far, just to get an idea of, how often those performances are happening in a normal situation. What other forms of music use is taking place? So do they have any recordings? Do they have any live concerts which have been recorded that could be broadcast on the radio? That type of thing, because these are all situations in which royalties might be generated. And then I talk them through as well the different tariffs or rates that we have for different types of music use. So for live performance, for example, you can get an idea of what a live performance might generate in terms of royalties, because we charge a percentage of the box office. So if you kind of make an estimation in terms of the size of a venue or average ticket price, you can get an idea of the kind of royalties that might come from a particular type of performance. And of course, bearing in mind that the royalty generated from a live performance will be divided between any of the copyright works in the programme based on the duration. So if your music takes up most of the programme, you'll receive a greater share of the royalty than you would for a shorter piece in a more varied programme. For broadcast, we publish our kind of broadcast per minute rates online for both radio and TV. So you can get an idea of what the kind of, although they fluctuate slightly, you can get an idea of the per minute rates that we're currently paying royalties for. I think once people have joined, the next question that I often get is, so where are my royalties? So which, valid question, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Number one on the list. So with any kind of situation like this, the first thing that I would look at is, has the work been registered? Is everything looking okay with that? We do occasionally find that people have forgotten to register a work, which can hold things up sometimes. So I'd check that there's a valid registration in place, and then I'd have a look at when the music usage took place. So, has it been in the last 6 months or the last 12 months? And check the payment schedules just to work out, is it something you should have been paid for by now? If so, and it's not there, can we look into it to find out why it might have been delayed, or if we need to get some further information about that? Or if it's something that's really recent, sometimes I'm afraid it is just a case of waiting a little bit longer. But I'd certainly always look into that, and just make sure that that we have the right information, that we're expecting the payment to come through at the right time. If it is something that we would have expected to be paid by now, we can then look into it. If it's a performance that we haven't received a report of, we can look into that. Again, if it's a broadcast or something online, we can look into it and try to find some more data that will help us to locate any missing or delayed payments. But I would say in the majority of cases, things flow through fairly automatically. As we talked about in terms of the the kind of numbers we're dealing with, that has to be the case, that a lot of this is automated and is processed as we would expect. And then we're just there to help answer any questions about, the amount of royalties that have been received, or if there's any question about when something will be paid, we can help with that.
That's just brilliant. I mean, it's really clear, and I know that this side of things does seem incredibly technical and daunting to a lot of musicians. And actually, listening to you talk about how much is set up and how much detail is involved in working this out, I'm not surprised that this feels technical and daunting, because it is complex.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great to have this clarity and to know that you're here to help people
Of
when
course. I mean,
they need it.
we want to be as transparent as possible. So we do actually publish our full distribution policy on our website, which is something in the region of 160 to 170 pages. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. I mean, obviously, we don't expect people to have to, sort of sift through that unless they, have a real interest in the workings of it all. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that we want this to be as transparent as possible. We make a lot of information available, but of course, because there is a lot of information, it can be difficult to navigate your way through it. So that's absolutely why we're here as well, to try and explain that, and help answer those questions that you might have more quickly, rather than maybe sifting through all the details or still having questions about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I say, I'm really grateful to you for coming on and explaining all of this stuff so clearly, and letting everyone know about it. Just before we round off, is there anything coming up at PRS, or anything you'd like to make any composers listening to this aware of? Like you mentioned, your composer sessions, that kind of thing. Is there anything you'd like to mention?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, our main priority during the pandemic has been to maximise royalty distributions to our members. And we know that public performance revenue is going to be heavily impacted due to the loss of live performances, both in the UK and overseas, which I think is especially true for composers and publishers in the classical sector. But we have been continuing our work in response to the pandemic. We launched the PRS Emergency Relief Fund in last March, which was a collaboration between PRS Foundation, the PRS Members Fund, and PRS for Music, which helped over 4,500 songwriters and composers so far, with more than £2 million paid out. We've also expanded our webinar series and held a series of virtual gigs with PRS Presents Lockdown, which was a 24-hour live stream featuring over 50 PRS members, and 2 virtual events recognising our members in the LGBTQ plus community and celebrating Black History Month as well. So we're continuing to do things that really celebrate our members' music. And I think also just important to remember, if you are a member of PRS, the PRS Members Fund has continued to support members facing hardship or illness through the provision of grants and loans. So all PRS members are eligible to apply for support from the fund if they've been a member for 7 years or have earned £500 in royalties. And every application is treated in confidence. And then finally, PRS Foundation is the leading charitable funder of new music and talent development in the UK. So since 2000, the foundation has awarded more than £35 million to over 7,000 new music projects, and there are still funding opportunities available to support composers at different stages of their careers, such as the Open Fund, the Women Make Music Fund, the Composers Fund, and the Sustaining Creativity Fund, which was launched in response to COVID-19. And you can apply to PRS Foundation if you're a member of PRS Music, or if you're not yet a member. You don't have to join to apply to the foundation, as long as you're not a member of another collecting society. So just a reminder that that's open to everyone as well, and hopefully continuing to support composers during this time.
Thank you. That's very, very comprehensive. I hope that our listeners will take you up on this, certainly. Right, well, what a great and informative conversation we've had. It's been really important, I think, to highlight this for composers, particularly at this time. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights, and thank you everyone for listening to Music Works. We're going to put the links to the resources that you've mentioned into our show notes as well, so that our listeners can access this. So it's goodbye from Harriet and goodbye from me. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, bye.